Hello and welcome to my channel. So if you're a returning viewer, if you're the returning viewer, thank you for returning. And if you're a first time viewer, do please think about sticking around. So what are we talking about today? Today, I thought we would look at the thorny topic of censorship. Now, censorship's a really, really big deal in general nowadays. Should this be censored? Should that be censored? This whole thing of, things being woke or not woke or politically correct or unpolitically correct or what have you. So I don't want to go into that, ad nauseum. So I thought I'd just talk about it as it relates to books. So I suppose there are different kinds of censorship in every kind of media. But I thought we'd look at specifically a few types of censorship or possible kinds of censorship in books. And I'm interested to see what you think. And here I'm speaking directly to the one person who actually watches my videos. So pay attention. So, first of all, here we have a classic book. Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. So, this is a really, really, obviously it's a massive classic. Pretty much everyone's heard of it, and it's a good example of what I want to talk about, because if you know anything about the book, there's a character whose name is Jim and he's a slave. Obviously, slavery existed at the time when this was written, or the story is set in the period when slavery existed. And he's referred to throughout the book by Tom and Huckleberry Finn and all the other characters who interact with him as N-word Jim. Now, of course, I'm not going to argue for a moment about the use of the N-word. I mean, obviously, it's absolutely horrific slur. And obviously, I'm against racial slurs, homophobic slurs. I'm against these kinds of slurs in general. This is obvious, Well, maybe it's not obvious. That's why I'm having to tell you. But so I don't condone the use of this kind of language at all. But there's been there's been talk at least. I don't know if it's been done, but there's been talk of going through Tom Sawyer, and I think Huckleberry Finn as well, and editing out the N-word, and instead of any N-word, using the word slave. So he'd be called Slave Jim. Of course, Slave Jim isn't very nice either, but I suppose it's less unpleasant than the N-word. So that's my first point. My first question: should books that have already been written, and also historic books like this, books that are considered classics, should they be retroactively edited out in order to avoid offence? Now, my personal opinion, you didn't ask for my opinion, but you're getting it anyway. My personal opinion is no. I think that, for example, Tom Sawyer was written in the 19th century, and it was written in a different world from now. Now, I'm not going to debate whether Mark Twain was racist or not. I don't know, and it's not really the point. I mean, he was writing, when he was using specific kind of language, it was the kind of language that people used in those days. That's how people spoke. I mean, we don't agree with it now, obviously. We see it as wrong. But that is how people were then. And then I think that we have to take into account when a book was written and the climate, the social climate and so on, in which it was written. You wouldn't read, for example, Shakespeare and expect Shakespeare to have the modern values that we have today. And I think it's true about a book like Tom Sawyer or other books around that in any period. You can't you can't sort of impose the ideas that we have today on works of art books that were produced in the past. That's just my opinion. You might agree, you might disagree. If you disagree, please let me know why. But that's my opinion. Okay, next point. This isn't really a case of any kind of censorship, because censorship in this category doesn't happen. This is an example. This is a book by a man who went by the name of Chopper Read. Now, if you've seen my channel before, you'll notice that you might recognize this. I did a video about this book. It was the most/only successful video I've ever produced on this channel. Successful, 106 views. But I'm using it to illustrate a point. In England, for example, there's a massive industry of true crime books. Now, true crime books can fall into various categories, but I'm speaking specifically about true crime books where villains, so-called villains, gangsters and so on, football hooligans and so on, and various kinds of violent ruffian they've retired from their exploits as criminals, and they've written books about their exploits, ghost-written books about their exploits. And yes, they're massively popular, these kinds of books. So my question would be, do you think that books like Chopper Read, Chopper from the Inside, similar books written or ghost-written by career criminals or former career criminals, should they be published? Should people be allowed to, in some way, profit from the things that they did when they were active criminals? This is a good example because this was Chopper Read's first foray into literature, and he actually wrote it while he was, or ghost wrote it while he was still in prison. And it's this book that shot Chopper Read to fame. You may not have heard of Chopper Read, but I mean, he's a kind of minor celebrity in Australia, And there's a whole industry about him. He wrote a lot of books that grew increasingly more fantastical. And in fact, I'm not talking about the veracity of this book, so we'll get into that another time. But there's also a film about him, a very, very successful film starring Eric Bana, and it really put Chopper Read on the map. So it shows that these kinds of this it might seem insignificant, but books like this can have a huge impact. The Cray twins would be another example. The notorious gangsters from 1960s gangsters in London. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry around them. Videos, documentaries, and a vast number of books. They wrote books about themselves. And, pretty much anyone who ever met them in any capacity has also written a book about them as well. So that's an example. This is an example of how, a book can ignite the career of someone who was a career criminal, albeit not a successful one by any means. And the cottage industry around the Cray twins can show how, books and what have you can be used to sustain a myth and to create a mythology around individuals who, by no means deserve any kind of mythology at all. I mean, basically people who are essentially scum. Okay, and now we're back on the trail of books in general, and I want to talk about banned books. Here are two examples of books that were at one point or another banned. There's excuse me, I want to do this one first. There's The Catcher in the Rye by J.D.Salinger. I believe that this book was banned in the USA or possibly also in the UK for quite a while. And I believe also Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov was also banned as well at one point. I know I'm playing a bit fast and loose with the dates of when they were banned, because when they were banned isn't really the point of the discourse here. The point is it right to ban books? I mean, I've read both of these books. Catcher in the Rye, I think, is a great book. I read it when I was 14. Found most of it quite funny, actually. And Lolita is a really, really interesting book. Particularly, it's a really good read. It's really enjoyable, particularly given that its subject matter is very, very difficult subject matter. I mean, in the first book here, Catcher in the Rye, you've got this young man who's, he's constantly flunking out of college. And, he's on a very, very downward spiral. And, I think the book talks about various topics which at the time when it was written were quite delicate. And obviously Lolita is about Humbert, who is essentially a paedophile, and his warped relationship, if we can call it that, with Lolita, who is a 12-year-old girl. So, again, this is not comfortable or easy subject matter. So obviously I'm against books like this being banned, okay, because they do have literary merit. I think it's a huge overreaction to ban them. Another example would be the Satanic Verses. I haven't read it, but I know all about, you've probably heard about the controversy when it came out. Salman Rushdie had a fatwa, a death sentence put on his head because the book was seen to be insulting towards Islam. So the question is, do you think books should be banned in some circumstances, whether they give offence because of their potential content, the potential sexual content, or what have you, or because of the kind of the description of teenage angst, or because it's offensive towards a particular religious group or some other group? Do you think that books should be banned? Another example of a book which is still published today, which is very questionable, is 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. And de Sade wrote this, I think, in the 18th century while he was confined probably in the Bastille. And, obviously Desard, sadist, is where we get the word sadist from. And Desard wrote this book, and, people who have, I have not read it, but there's other reviewers on YouTube you can find who say that, one in particular say that, he basically wrote this book as a, it's kind of a book, it was a book for him and his friends, a book where intended for people who wished to exercise their right hand or their left hand if they are left-handed. I think you get what I mean. So, a questionable literary content and horrific content from what I understand. I think the book contains every kind of sexual perversion in the book. No pun intended. So should something like that still be published? I mean, you can find it in classics sections of bookstores. Or what about Hitler's Mein Kampf? Should that be banned? What do you think? Book banning, book censorship. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, or the comments up here, or wherever the comments are. And if you're still watching, if you have endured this video, thank you very much. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.